On the second day of November 1755, in the sprawling chambers of the Hofburg Palace, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria gave birth for the 15th time into a world still trembling from the 7 Years' War. The infant girl, christened Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna, and later known to history as Marie Antoinette, arrived wrapped in the silk and ceremony of the Habsburg-Reign dynasty, a bloodline that had shaped the contours of European power for centuries. Her baptism took place beneath gilded fresco and the watchful eyes of cardinals, her tiny hand anointed with holy water as the organ's thunder filled the chapel. She was born not merely into privilege, but into duty, a living instrument of diplomatic alliance, her destiny inscribed before her first breath. Her mother, the pragmatic and devout Maria Theresa, governed the sprawling Austrian Empire with an iron will tempered by maternal tenderness. In her private letters, the Empress wrote of her children with affection, yet always through the lens of statecraft. "Children are the ornaments of the throne," she once observed, "but they are also its chains." Maria Antonia spent her early years at Schönbrunn Palace, where summer light cascaded through towering windows onto marble floors, and the gardens stretched toward horizons punctuated by statuary and fountains. Her education, supervised by Countess von Brandeis, emphasized courtly grace over intellectual rigor. While her academic instruction remained limited, she received training in music from Christoph Willibald Gluck himself, the composer whose operas would revolutionize European theater. Her fingers danced across harpsichord keys, and her voice, though unremarkable, carried the sweetness expected of an archduchess. The 7 Years' War had reshuffled the deck of European alliances, culminating in the diplomatic revolution that joined Austria and France against their mutual enemies, Prussia and Britain. This unprecedented realignment required cement, and that cement would be marriage. Maria Theresa understood the algebra of power. Her daughter would become the living bridge between Vienna and Versailles. In 1768, negotiations commenced for Maria Antonia's betrothal to Louis the August, the awkward and earnest grandson of Louis XV, himself destined to inherit the throne of France as Louis XVI. The Empress personally oversaw her daughter's transformation from German Archduchess to French Dauphine, ensuring she mastered French language and manners, though Maria Antonia's accent would forever betray her origins. The proxy marriage occurred in Vienna on April 19, 1770, in the Church of the Augustinian Friars. Courtiers observed Marie Antoinette's trembling hands as she signed the marriage contract, her signature Marie Antoinette Joseph Jean, abandoning her Germanic name for its French equivalent. Witnesses recorded that she wept as she embraced her mother for the final time. Maria Theresa's instructions were explicit and unsparing. "You must love the King of France and his subjects," she commanded. "Forget that you were ever Austrian." The Golden Cage, arrival at Versailles and the Court of Masks. On May 7, 1770, Marie Antoinette departed Vienna, traveling westward in a gilded procession of 132 carriages. At the Rhin Island near Kiel, she entered a specially constructed wooden pavilion erected on the border between Austrian and French territories. Here, in a ceremony of deliberate symbolism, she was stripped of every Austrian garment, every jewel and possession from her former life. French ladies in waiting dressed her anew in French silk, French lace, French identity. She emerged from that threshold, no longer Maria Antonia, but Marie Antoinette, a creature of France, or so the theater insisted. The physical wedding at Versailles on May 16, 1770, unfolded with spectacular pageantry. The chapel royal overflowed with aristocrats draped in brocade and man. Archbishop de Rohan blessed the union, while Marie Antoinette in white satin embroidered with silver thread knelt beside her husband, a 16-year-old locksmith enthusiast who found more comfort in his workshop than in statecraft. Celebrations consumed Paris for days. Fireworks illuminated the night sky above the Place Louis XV, but tragedy punctured the jubilation. A stampede erupted when wooden viewing platforms collapsed and flames devoured temporary structures. Contemporary accounts documented the loss of at least 132 lives crushed or burned alive in the chaos. One witness, the Marquis de Beaumont, recorded in his diary, "The rejoicing turned to lamentation, and the cries of joy became screams of agony." At Versailles, Marie Antoinette confronted a labyrinth of ritual and resentment. The palace teemed with factions, supporters of the royal aunts, devotees of Madame du Barry, the king's mistress, competing noble houses vying for proximity to power. The Dauphine found herself isolated, her youth and foreignness inviting mockery. Courtiers whispered l'oreillon behind gilded fans, a cruel pun meaning both the Austrian woman and the Austrian ambassador. The Comte de Merci served as her mother's eyes and ears, sending meticulous reports to Vienna, detailing every misstep, every breach of etiquette. Maria Theresa's letters arrived like clockwork, filled with admonishments. "You must be more reserved," she scolded in one missive. "You must not laugh so freely. The dignity of the crown requires composure." The marriage remained unconsummated for 7 agonizing years, a source of international speculation and private humiliation. Louis August's timidity and possible phimosis created a conjugal impasse that became the subject of diplomatic correspondence and satirical pamphlets. In 1777, Maria Antoinette's brother, Joseph Roman II, visited Versailles and apparently delivered blunt advice to the couple. Shortly thereafter, the marriage was finally consummated. The Dauphine wrote triumphantly to her mother, "I am in the most essential happiness." In December 1778, she delivered her first child, Marie-Thérèse Charlotte, called Madame Royale. Sons followed: Louis Joseph in 1781, Louis Charles in 1785, and a daughter, Sophie Beatrix, in 1786, who would not make it out of infancy. The theater of excess, fashion, favorites, and the creation of Madame Deficit. With motherhood came a curious paradox: increased domestic contentment alongside mounting public resentment. Marie Antoinette's influence radiated through the arts and fashions of France, her taste becoming the weather vane by which courtiers oriented themselves. She worked intimately with Rose Burton, the milliner and dressmaker whose boutique on the Rue Santer became a pilgrimage site for style seekers. Together with her hairdresser Léonard Autier, she popularized the pouf towering hairstyles adorned with feathers, ribbons, miniature ships, and even gardens. One contemporary journalist described her coiffure as a monument to frivolity, rising 3 ft from the scalp. These extravagances cost fortunes, and pamphlets began calculating the expense of her wardrobe. While France's peasantry starved, the Queen cultivated a circle of intimates, most notably the gentle Princess de Lamballe, appointed superintendent of the Queen's household, and the cunning Duchess d'Aurillac, who became governor to the royal children. The Pauillac clan, a family of minor nobility, ascended to dizzying heights through the Queen's patronage, securing positions, pensions, and estates that drained the treasury. One courtier, the Duc de Lévis, observed acidly, "The Polignacs have discovered a gold mine in the Queen's friendship." Such favoritism bred resentment among excluded courtiers and fueled accusations of mismanagement. Marie Antoinette commissioned the redesign of the Petition, a neoclassical chateau gifted to her by Louis XVI. She transformed its grounds into an English garden, then constructed the Hameau de la, a meticulously crafted rustic village complete with a functioning farm, mill, and cottages. Here, dressed in muslin gowns rather than court panniers, she played at being a shepherdess, milking perfumed cows into several porcelain buckets. This pastoral fantasy, intended as escape from court suffocation, became instead a symbol of her disconnect from reality. One revolutionary pamphlet wrote, "While France bleeds, the Queen plays milkmaid in her toy village, ignorant of the break her people lack." The Queen patronized the arts with genuine passion. She championed G.L. Rook's operatic reforms, ensuring the success of his Iphigenie on Oid in Paris. She supported the playwright Bommer, though his The Marriage of Figaro contained subversive critiques of aristocratic privilege. Most significantly, she sat for the painter Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun, who produced luminous portraits that simultaneously humanized and idealized her subject. One such painting, Marie Antoinette in a chemise dress, 1783, depicted the Queen in a simple muslin gown, the chemise Alerin, and provoked scandal when exhibited at the Salon. Critics condemned the informal attire as undignified, with one writing, "The Queen of France has allowed herself to be painted in her undergarments. The necklace that shattered a crown, the diamond affair of 1785. In 1785, a scandal erupted that would irreparably damage Marie Antoinette's reputation despite her complete innocence. The affair of the diamond necklace began with a piece of jewelry, a magnificent creation by the court jewelers Balma and Bassange, featuring 540 diamonds weighing approximately 2,800 carats. The necklace had been designed for Madame du Barry. But Louis XV's passing left the jewelers desperate to sell their masterwork. They repeatedly approached Marie Antoinette, who declined, allegedly stating, "We have more need of ships than of jewels." Into this intrigue stepped Jean de Valois Sani Comtesse de Lamotte, a con artist who claimed descent from the Valois kings and possessed the audacity of a theatrical genius. She orchestrated an elaborate fraud involving Cardinal de Rohan, the Grand Almoner of France, whom Marie Antoinette despised for his dissolute reputation. Lamotte convinced Rohan that the Queen secretly desired the necklace, but required discretion due to financial constraints. She forged correspondence, staged a midnight meeting in the Versailles gardens using a prostitute, Marie Nicole Louis Oliver, who resembled the Queen, and persuaded Rohan to purchase the necklace on the Queen's behalf. The Cardinal obtained the necklace from the jewelers, signed the promissory note Marie Antoinette de France, and delivered it to Lamotte's accomplices, who promptly dismantled it and sold the diamonds across Europe. When payment came due and the Queen knew nothing of the arrangement, the fraud unraveled. Louis XVI insisted on a public trial to clear his wife's name, but the spectacle backfired catastrophically. The Parliament of Paris acquitted Rohan, essentially exonerating him and implicitly suggesting the Queen's involvement. The Baroness d'Auberc recorded the public reaction. People said the Queen coveted the necklace, but ashamed of her extravagance, invented this elaborate deception. The pamphlets, the libels, multiplied like plague rats. Obscene engravings depicted the Queen in compromising positions with various lovers, including the Cardinal, the Duchess d'Oliac, and Count Axel von Fersonen, the handsome Swedish nobleman who served as her loyal confidant. Whether their relationship was romantic remains debated, but their correspondence reveals deep affection. Fersen wrote in his diary, "I can see her whenever I wish. She has given me this privilege." These intimate bonds, real or imagined, became ammunition for revolutionaries eager to delegitimize the monarchy. The gathering storm, debt, famine, and the calling of the Estates General. By the late 1780s, France teetered on the precipice of financial ruin. American Revolutionary War, which France had supported to weaken Britain, cost the Treasury an estimated 1 billion LER. Combined with decades of deficit spending, crop failures, and regressive taxation that exempted nobles and clergy while crushing peasants, the kingdom approached insolvency. A series of finance ministers, Turgot, who attempted to abolish guilds, and Corps of Labor, Necker, who published the controversial Compondua exposing government finances, and Khan, who proposed taxing noble land holdings, all failed to resolve the crisis. Marie Antoinette, whether through genuine political opinion or factional loyalty, sometimes intervened in ministerial appointments, earning the nickname Madame Deficit, as though she alone bore responsibility for France's bankruptcy. The winter of 1788 to 1789 brought catastrophic hardship. Grain harvests failed, bread prices soared to unprecedented levels, and riots erupted across the provinces. In Paris, women queued for hours in freezing temperatures to purchase loaves if any remained. One observer, the bookseller Simon Prosper Hardy, noted in his journal, "One sees emaciated faces everywhere, and children crying for bread their mother cannot provide." Meanwhile at Versailles, the court continued its rituals, theatrical performances, hunting parties, elaborate dinners, oblivious or indifferent to the suffering beyond the palace gates. Louis XVI, pressured by advisers and recognizing the depth of the crisis, took the extraordinary step of convening the Estates General for the first time since 1614. This assembly of representatives from the three estates, clergy, nobility, and commoners, met at Versailles on May 5, 1789. From the beginning, procedural disputes over voting methods revealed fundamental disagreements about power and representation. The Third Estate, comprising commoners, demanded equal influence. On June 17th, they declared themselves the National Assembly, effectively claiming sovereignty. 3 days later, locked out of their meeting hall, they gathered in a nearby tennis court and swore the famous tennis court oath, pledging not to disband until France had a constitution. Marie Antoinette observed these developments with alarm. Her correspondence with Mercy Ajanto reveals her belief that Louis XVI should assert royal authority more forcefully. She wrote, "The king shows too much gentleness. Weakness only emboldens these revolutionaries." Yet her own position grew increasingly precarious. Pamphlets portrayed her as the malevolent force behind the throne, the Austrian manipulating a weak king, conspiring with foreign powers to crush French liberties. The mythology of the Austrian Committee took root. Allegations that she secretly communicated state secrets to her brother, Holy Roman Emperor Joseph Roman II, who had passed away in February 1790, and later his successor, Leopold Roman II, preparing the ground for foreign invasion. October Days, the Women's March, and the End of Versailles. On July 14, 1789, Parisian crowds stormed the Bastille fortress, liberating prisoners and seizing weapons. The fall of this medieval prison, though housing only 7 inmates, became the symbolic birth of revolution. Louis XVI famously asked the Duc de Rochefoucauld-Liénard upon hearing the news, "Is this a revolt?" The Duke replied, "No, sire, it is a revolution." In the provinces, the great fear swept through villages as peasants attacked chateaux and burned feudal documents. The National Assembly, now ascendant, abolished feudal privileges on August 4th and adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen on August 26th, documents asserting principles fundamentally incompatible with absolute monarchy. Marie Antoinette's position within this maelstrom became untenable. On October 5th, 1789, thousands of Parisian women, enraged by bread shortages and armed with pikes, muskets, and kitchen knives, marched from Paris to Versailles through rain and mud. They arrived at the palace gates demanding bread, and the king's return to Paris. Contemporary accounts described their fury and determination. One participant later testified, "We swore we would bring back the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's boy," crude references to the royal family. That night, crowds broke into the palace, murdered several royal guards, and came within moments of reaching the queen's bedchamber. She fled through secret passages, narrowly escaping assassination. The morning of October 6th brought an extraordinary confrontation. Lafayette, commander of the National Guard, persuaded the royal family to appear on a balcony overlooking the assembled crowd. Marie Antoinette stepped forward with her two eldest children, but the mob shouted for them to withdraw. She returned alone, standing in full view of thousands who had called for her execution hours earlier. She curtsied deeply, a gesture of submission and courage, and silence gradually replaced the shouts. One witness, the journalist Camille Desmoulins, wrote, "She stood like a statue, pale but composed, and for a moment the Queen conquered the Republic, yet conquest proved temporary." The royal family departed Versailles that afternoon, their carriages surrounded by National Guardsmen and the exultant mob. They carried loaves of bread on their bayonets and sang revolutionary songs. Upon reaching the Tuileries Palace in Paris, where the family would reside under what amounted to house arrest, Marie Antoinette reportedly said, "They are forcing us to live in Paris in this palace that has not housed kings for a century." The age of Versailles had ended. The age of revolution had begun. Captivity and conspiracy, life in the Tuileries and plans for escape. The Tuileries became a gilded prison. National Guardsmen stood watch at every entrance, monitoring the royal family's movements and visitors. The king and queen maintained the facade of constitutional monarchy, attending mass, dining with prescribed ceremony, and hosting carefully supervised receptions. Yet beneath this surface, Marie Antoinette engaged in desperate correspondence with loyalists and foreign courts, seeking assistance for what she increasingly viewed as a captivity demanding escape. Her relationship with Count Axel von Fersen deepened during this period. A Swedish aristocrat devoted to her cause, Fersen orchestrated plans for the royal family's flight from Paris. Their correspondence, often written in cipher or invisible ink, reveals meticulous coordination. She wrote to him in June 1791, "Adieu, most loved and loving of men, I embrace you with all my heart." Historians debate whether their relationship was consummated, but the emotional intimacy is undeniable. The plan finalized in spring 1791 called for the family to travel at night to the fortress town of Montmedy near the Austrian Netherlands where loyal troops waited. From there, Louis XVI could rally royalist forces and negotiate from strength. On the night of June 20th, 1791, the royal family disguised themselves, the king as a valet, the queen as a governess, and departed the Tuileries in a heavy traveling coach. The escape initially proceeded according to plan, but delays accumulated. They failed to rendezvous with cavalry escorts at scheduled points. As their coach passed through Varennes, a small town near the border, Jean-Baptiste Drouet, the postmaster, recognized the king's profile from coins and alerted local authorities. The apprehension at Vannes destroyed any remaining illusion of constitutional partnership. National Guardsmen surrounded the coach and a furious crowd gathered, hurling insults and threats. The family was detained in the home of a local grocer while the National Assembly debated their fate. On June 25th, they returned to Paris under heavy guard, traveling through silent, hostile crowds. One witness recorded, "Not a voice was raised, not a hat removed. The people watched their king return as prisoners watched the condemned march past. The assembly officially declared the king had been kidnapped to preserve the fiction of constitutional monarchy, but public trust evaporated." Republican sentiment, once marginal, now flourished openly. The storming of the Tuileries and the fall of the French monarchy. Throughout 1791 and early 1792, Marie Antoinette's correspondence with Austria and other European courts intensified. Her brother Leopold Roman II and the Prussian king issued the Declaration of Pillnitz threatening intervention if the French royal family faced harm. These communications, intercepted and published by revolutionaries, confirmed suspicions of royal treachery. One pamphlet declared, "The Austrian woman has sold France to her relatives. She is a traitor to the nation that made her queen." Political factions radicalized. The Legislative Assembly, which replaced the National Assembly in October 1791, contained giantess who favored war against Austria to expose royal duplicity and spread revolutionary ideals. Jacobins, led by Maximilien Robespierre, Gore Danton, and Jean-Paul Marat, advocated abolishing monarchy entirely. Street clubs like the Cordelier mobilized popular anger. On April 20, 1792, under pressure from multiple directions, Louis XVI paradoxically declared war on Austria, a decision pushed by those who hoped either to reunite France against external threats or to expose the monarchy's disloyalty. Military defeats followed quickly. French armies, disorganized and poorly led, suffered humiliating losses against Austrian and Prussian forces. The Duke of Brunswick, commanding the coalition armies, issued a manifesto threatening Paris with destruction if harm came to the royal family. A catastrophic diplomatic blunder that inflamed Republican sentiment. Marie Antoinette's correspondence shows she encouraged foreign military intervention, believing it the only means of saving the monarchy and her family. She wrote to Fenn, "The madness here grows daily. Only the advance of the foreign armies can save us now." On August 10, 1792, radical sections of Paris, mobilized by Jacobin orators, stormed the Tuileries Palace. The king had already fled to the Legislative Assembly seeking protection, ordering his Swiss guards not to resist. Approximately 600 guardsmen lost their lives in the massacre that followed. Overwhelmed by cannon fire and pikes, the crowd ransacked the palace, discovering the king's secret correspondence, the infamous Ammo de Fer, which contained letters proving his communications with immigrants and foreign powers. The evidence, though circumstantial regarding specific plots, condemned him in public opinion. The monarchy was abolished on September 21, 1792. The royal family was transferred to the Temple, a medieval fortress in Paris's Maire district. Here, in stark chambers far removed from Versailles' splendor, they lived under the surveillance of guards who addressed Louis as Cap and Marie Antoinette as the widow. Commissars inventoried their possessions, confiscating jewelry, books, and personal items. One commissioner recorded, "The woman Cap possesses excessive vanity, though reduced circumstances have stripped her finery. She maintains haughty bearing despite her fall." The Blad's Edge, Trial, Terror, and Louis XVI-th's Trial and Execution. On December 11, 1792, Louis XVI appeared before the National Convention, charged with high treason, conspiring with foreign enemies, and violating constitutional liberty. His trial unfolded amid factional warfare between Girondins, who sought clemency or exile, and radical Jacobins, who demanded execution. The evidence included intercepted correspondence, the Duke of Brunswick's manifesto, and testimony from disgruntled courtiers. Louis defended himself with dignity but limited effectiveness. When asked if he had ordered troops to fire on citizens, he responded, "I never gave such orders. My conscience is clear." The convention voted on his fate in January 1793. After lengthy deliberation, deputies voted 387 to 334 for capital punishment without conditions. Even the king's cousin, Philippe Égalité, Duke of Orléans, voted for execution, a decision that would haunt his memory. On January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was transported in a closed carriage to the Place de Reval. Contemporary descriptions detail his final moments. Dressed in a simple brown coat, hair trimmed short by the executioner, he attempted to address the crowd from the scaffold, but was drowned out by drum rolls ordered by General Santerre. According to witnesses, his final words included, "I die innocent of all the crimes laid to my charge. I pardon those who have occasioned my death, and I pray to God that the blood you are going to shed may never be visited on France." The guillotine blade fell at 10:22 a.m. An executioner held the severed head aloft, and the crowd erupted in shouts of "Viva Republic!" Marie Antoinette learned of her husband's fate while imprisoned in the Temple. Madame Royale, the couple's daughter, later recalled in her memoirs, "My mother received the news with a terrible silence. She did not weep or cry out. She simply sat motionless as though her soul had departed with his. The Queen's captivity intensified. She was separated from her son, 8-year-old Louis Chal, who was placed under the supervision of Anton Simon, a cobbler tasked with re-educating the boy in revolutionary principles. Testimony later revealed that Simon subjected the young heir to verbal and possibly physical abuse, teaching him revolutionary songs and attempting to erase his royal identity. Marie Antoinette could sometimes hear his voice through the walls of the temple, but was forbidden contact. Her health deteriorated, hemorrhaging, malnutrition, and what was likely tuberculosis or uterine cancer. Yet she maintained correspondence with remaining loyalists, writing in code on scraps of paper. The Revolutionary Tribunal, Marie Antoinette's trial. By summer 1793, France had descended fully into the Terror. The Committee of Public Safety, dominated by Robespierre, wielded dictatorial power. Revolutionary tribunals prosecuted enemies of the Republic with theatrical efficiency, trials designed more for propaganda than justice. On August 2nd, Marie Antoinette was transferred from the Temple to the Conciergerie, the prison adjoining the Pale Days. Her cell, measuring approximately 12 ft by 9 ft, contained a cot, a chair, and a small table. Guards watched her constantly, even during her most private moments. One guard later testified, "She bore her indignities with remarkable composure, never complaining, though her suffering was evident." Her trial began on October 14, 1793, before the Revolutionary Tribunal presided over by Marshal Herman. Chief Prosecutor Anton Fouquier-Tinville accumulated charges: conspiracy with foreign powers, orchestrating counter-revolutionary plots, depleting the national treasury, and most shockingly violating her son's innocence. This final accusation, extracted from the traumatized Louis, shell through coercion by Jacques, represented revolutionary propaganda at its most vicious. When Haber testified that the Queen had engaged in unspeakable acts with her son, gasps filled the courtroom. Marie Antoinette, who had remained largely silent throughout proceedings, rose and responded with devastating simplicity, "If I have not replied, it is because nature itself refuses to answer such a charge. I appealed to all mothers present." Her defense attorneys, Claude Chauveau-Lagarde and Guillaume Tron du Coudray, had been appointed only hours before trial commenced, given no time to prepare, and denied access to evidence. They argued that no credible evidence supported the charges, that correspondence with her family did not constitute treason, and that financial mismanagement, if it occurred, was the king's responsibility, not hers. But the verdict had been determined before proceedings began. The radical journalist Jacques Eber wrote in his newspaper Le Parisien, "The Austrian tigress must be destroyed. She is the enemy of France, and her death will sanctify the Republic." On October 16th at 4:00 a.m., after a trial lasting 16 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all charges. Fouquier-Tinville demanded the ultimate sentence. The sentence was pronounced immediately: execution by guillotine. That same morning, Marie Antoinette was returned to her cell to await the tumbril. She wrote a final letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, expressing love for her children and forgiveness for her enemies. "I ask forgiveness of all whom I know, and especially you, my sister, for all the grief which I may have caused you. I forgive all my enemies the evil they have done me. Marie Antoinette's final moments, the guillotine at Place de Revolution, at 11:00 on October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette was dressed in a simple white cotton dress, her hair cut short by the executioner's assistant. Unlike her husband, who had traveled in a closed carriage, she was paraded through Paris in an open tumbril, a crude cart typically used for transporting criminals. The artist Jacques-Louis David sketched her during this journey, capturing her gaunt profile, thin lips set in determination, hands bound behind her back. Contemporary descriptions emphasize her extreme pallor, the result of months of hemorrhaging and illness, yet also remark on her composure. The route from the Concierge to the Place de Revolt stretched through streets packed with jeering crowds. Revolutionary songs echoed off buildings. Some witnesses threw refuse, others simply stared in silence. The journey lasted approximately 1 hour. A British observer present in Paris, Grace Dalrymple Elliott, later wrote, "She, who had been the most beautiful woman in France, was now a spectre." Yet she maintained a dignity that shamed those who gloated at her passage. Another witness, the painter Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, who had fled France years earlier, later wrote upon hearing the news, "I wept for 3 days. The woman I had painted so full of grace and life, reduced to such indignity, it was monstrous." At the scaffold erected in what is now the Place de Concorde, Marie Antoinette ascended the steps without assistance. Executioner Charles-Henri Sanson, who had also executed Louis XVI, later recorded that she accidentally stepped on his foot and immediately apologized, "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose," a final gesture of aristocratic courtesy amid barbarity. These would be her last recorded words. At 12:15 p.m., the blade fell. Sanson lifted her severed head to the crowd, which erupted in celebration. Revolutionary newspapers reported the execution with triumphant language. Ebers Guillotine declared, "The head of the female tyrant has finally fallen under the avenging blade. She is no more that proud queen who wanted to bathe in the blood of French patriots." Her body and head were thrown into an unmarked grave in the Melun cemetery, covered with quicklime. No ceremony marked her burial, no prayers, no witnesses save the gravediggers. The woman who had once embodied the pinnacle of European aristocracy disappeared into the earth without even a marker to remember her name. Marie Antoinette's legacy from revolutionary villain to icon. The Bourbon Restoration of 1815 following Napoleon's final defeat brought a reversal of revolutionary judgments. Louis XVIII, brother of the executed king, ordered the exhumation and burial of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Their remains, identified by fragments of clothing and other evidence, were transferred to the Basilica of Saint-Denis, traditional resting place of French monarchs. A memorial chapel was constructed and elaborate tombs commissioned. The woman vilified as Madame Deficit, and the Austrian was recast as a royal martyr, a victim of revolutionary excess, a devoted mother and wife destroyed by forces beyond her control. Throughout the 19th century, Marie Antoinette became a contested symbol in France's ongoing struggle over its revolutionary heritage. Royalists produced hagiographic accounts emphasizing her piety, maternal devotion, and courage in captivity. The poet Alphonse de Lamartine wrote, "She was less a queen than a woman who suffered all that tyranny could inflict upon dignity and innocence." Conversely, Republican historians maintained that she embodied the corruption and excess of the Ancien Regime, a foreign infiltrator who never truly became French, whose extravagance and political meddling contributed to the monarchy's collapse. The 20th century brought more nuanced assessments. Stephen's 1932 biography, Marie Antoinette, The Portrait of an Average Woman, portrayed her as fundamentally ordinary, a woman of limited political understanding, thrust into extraordinary circumstances, neither villain nor saint, but a human being constrained by dynastic duty and court intrigue. Historians like Evelyn Lever and Antonia Fraser emphasize the gendered nature of revolutionary propaganda, noting how Marie Antoinette became the target of graphic and slanderous pamphlets. Accusations of immorality and depravity that reflected deeper anxieties about female power and foreign influence. Modern feminist scholarship reads Marie Antoinette as a scapegoat. Her body and reputation sacrificed to revolutionary masculinities need to symbolically destroy the old order. The charge of violating natural family boundaries during her trial particularly represents an attempt to defile maternal sanctity itself, to render her not merely guilty but monstrous. Her famous and almost certainly apocryphal phrase, "Let them eat cake," which appears in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Confessions years before she arrived in France, demonstrates how historical myths attach themselves to convenient figures, regardless of factual accuracy. In popular culture, Marie Antoinette has been endlessly reimagined. Norma Shear's sympathetic portrayal in the 1938 MGM film Marie Antoinette, Sophia Coppola's 2006 film starring Kirsten Dunst, which emphasized teenage alienation and the artificiality of court life through anachronistic music and contemporary sensibilities. Countless novels, operas, and theatrical productions. Auction houses periodically sell items allegedly connected to her. Pearls, portraits, furniture from the Petit Triennale fetching extraordinary prices from collectors fascinated by her story. Museums at Versailles preserve her apartments and personal effects, allowing modern visitors to walk through spaces she once inhabited. The historiographical debate continues. Was she primarily a victim of circumstance, a teenager married into a foreign court, manipulated by factions, scapegoated for systemic failures, or did she bear genuine responsibility for political interference, financial extravagance, and conspiring with foreign powers? The truth, as always, resists simple categorization. Archival research reveals a woman more politically engaged than traditional accounts suggested, yet less influential than revolutionary propaganda claimed. Her correspondence shows deep affection for her children, frustration with her husband's indecision, and loyalty to monarchical principle she believed divinely ordained. Music